President David, Rotarians and guests, for me it's a real pleasure to formally welcome and introduce Professor Richard Blandy as our guest speaker for today's luncheon. Professor Blandy, or Dick, as many of us know him, his biographical details have been circulated in the bulletin and also on the website. And in the interest of time, I'll only refer to his more significant roles and achievements. Before doing so, I would just like to mention that Dick has been a central figure over many years in the academic and business world, not only in Adelaide, but in a much wider reach, nationally and overseas. I'm also aware that a large number of our members follow his writings on the South Australian economic outlook over many years, and no doubt we might hear something about that later. He's currently an adjunct professor in the business school at the University of South Australia and has been a member of numerous government boards and committees, including the Premier Science and Research Council, the Energy Consumers Council, the Adelaide Metropolitan Area Consultative Committee, and the Essential Services Commission of South Australia. And he currently provides research and comment through his consultancy company, AustralAsia, on a range of subjects and issues, including economic growth and industry policy, globalisation and employment issues. Dick is very much a family man, has been married to Roslyn for some 52 years, and they have 3 children and 7 grandchildren. They have travelled and lived overseas in various cities, including Geneva and New York, and now live in Norwood, where I've been given some late information where he's a very prominent member of the Norwood Wisteria Society and well known for growing remarkably long racemes. I'm not quite sure what they are, Dick, but you might want to elaborate on that. The title for Dick's presentation is The Economic Outlook. Rotarians and guests, would you please welcome Dick?
Thank you very much, Dick. It's a very great pleasure to be speaking to Rotary here today. Rotary is an organisation for which I have very high regard for what the Rotary does, and it's a great pleasure to speak to you today. Now, I've prepared far too much material, so I'm going to have to cannibalise what I do. Now, is this not... It was working before. Beautiful. Thanks, mate. A round of applause for our instant technician. Okay, well, you all know the story here. South Australia is in terrible economic trouble. If you look over the last couple of years, our unemployment rate leads the country. It's up 1.5% over 2 years, compared with Australia, up 0.5%. The labour force participation rate, that is the numbers of people, the proportion of people who are of working age, who actually are trying to work, is far lower than the rest of the country. And if you added the difference in there, our effective unemployment rate would be 10.5 to 11%. Employment has grown very very little over the last couple of years. As you can see, it's about nearly 10% of the growth rate of the numbers of people in employment over in Australia as a whole. And if you look in the last 7 years from the GFC, from the depths of the GFC, we've only managed to add about 13,000 odd jobs, and for Australia you can see the growth has been approximately 1 million. So if we held our share at the depths of the GFC in September 2008, we would have added 70,000 jobs, and we've actually added about 13. So we'll now rapidly go over, and I'm going to leave this with you so that it can be circulated to you. What we have here is the red numbers are the budget forecasts in the South Australian budget, and above those are my forecasts. So you can see that I think basically that the South Australian economy is going to grow at half the rate that the government projected in the last budget. Employment is actually growing at half the rate that was projected, and I predict that the unemployment rate will reach 8.5% in South Australia by the middle of next year. By comparison, these are the forecasts from the Commonwealth budget, which themselves are probably, for Australia as a whole, which themselves are probably optimistic. Now here, these are a number of economic forecasters. The OECD, which is the Club of Rich Nations, The Economist, the International Monetary Fund, and the Bureau of Resources and Energy Economics, which is now part of the Department of Industry. They, for the Commonwealth Government, make long-run forecasts. And you can see, what I should tell you is that for the world to stand still, that is for the unemployment rate not to increase, that number should be 4%. And the reason for that is that the world's population is growing rapidly and the labour force and productivity growth is very high. So 4% just enables the unemployment rate to be held constant. And the world is not going to grow at 4% in the current year, and it is going to struggle back to 4% 2018 to 19. It's not going to get to that level before then. That's what the forecasters think. The USA, that's normally up around 3% or more. The Europe is up over 2% normally. Asia is up 7% or so. Australia, to hold the line, we need a bit over 3.25%. So you can see that the general outlook here is that we're not up to trend. We're not up to trend. We're struggling. The world and Australia. 2018, even Australia, we need 3.25 to be right up there. Europe, world just struggles back to some sort of trend, rate of growth. So, summary of outlook for the next 5 years, world is going to struggle. You know, it's much easier to, as we all know, if we played football, much easier to kick goals if the wind is behind you. The wind is not going to be behind Australia or South Australia. Europe and the US is going to do a bit better than it has been. Asian growth is going to slow. Southeast Asia and the Middle East are probably going to be some of the better performers, and India. Australia is going to be sub-trend, what I'd describe as blah, you know, not terrible, but not very good either. And South Australia, unfortunately, is looking bleak. What to do? Well, real growth comes from the private sector. I have to tell you that, and I hope that there's not too much disagreement in this room. Before we can improve our economic outlook, we must improve the private sector's investment outlook in one way or another. It's important, I think, that rather than soldiering on with unproductive government spending programs, ones that can't pass cost-benefit analysis under any way, shape or form, they should be eliminated because they're not actually doing anything productive. Push the spending, if you want, into something that matters more. We need to propose a credible path to balanced budget and debt reduction program, and we must foster startups. We need to reinvent ourselves, particularly in this state, as I'll argue, and we need to find some inexpensive method of reinventing ourselves, which means we must try a lot of new things. A lot of them will fail, but the more we try, the more successes we will find that the economy can be rebuilt around. Now, I think there's far too much centralised bureaucratic control over a number of the government production units, schools, hospitals and so on. They should be given their own budgets and told to get out and do the best they can. Business training to small businesses is terribly important. A lot of small businesses fail, not because they don't have good ideas, but because they don't know how to manage themselves as businesses and get into all sorts of unnecessary trouble. Startups should be deregulated. 3 years for a startup with zero regulation strikes me as the way to go to shock something into happening. And if the startup creates a nuisance, okay, deal with that. The business enterprise centres should be restored, and we should utilise Adelaide's incredible livability. Here we are in this wonderful space, for example, today, to attract the highly skilled design, R&D, marketing teams of international businesses here, especially from Asia. Who needs to battle the traffic in Jakarta for 2 hours in the smoke, in smog, if they can be here, for example? Why don't we sell the livability of Adelaide to these high-tech teams? What's being done in the state? Well, not a lot. Underperformance continues relative to Australia as a whole. The government's forecast GSP growth rates in the last few budgets have been implausibly high. The debt fall is because of an accounting trick of transferring 2.7 billion of state government debt to SA Water. No deregulation or tax cuts for small start-up businesses. We've been through a period of blaming the Commonwealth for South Australia's problems, despite Premier Weatherill correctly saying that the world does not owe us a living. Very disappointing performance, in my opinion, bereft of growth ideas. And the Gilman episode, which I might comment on just a little bit more, shows that groupthink has set in to the government. Now, what is groupthink? Well, groupthink is what led President Kennedy to the Bay of Pigs fiasco in Cuba. Only those who agreed with the general trend of what was to be done were allowed to participate. Wikipedia says, groupthink is a psychological phenomenon that occurs within a group of people in which the desire for harmony or conformity in the group results in an irrational or dysfunctional decision-making outcome. We're talking about Gilman here. Group members try to minimise conflict and reach a consensus decision without critical evaluation of alternative viewpoints, by actively suppressing dissenting viewpoints and by isolating themselves from outside influences. Loyalty to the group requires individuals to avoid raising controversial issues or alternative solutions, and there is a loss of individual creativity, uniqueness and independent thinking. The dysfunctional group dynamics of the in-group produces an illusion of invulnerability, an inflated certainty that the right decision has been made. That's all from Wikipedia. So the chances are that the South Australian government will make more Gilman-style 6,000 jobs calls, I think, are pretty high, along with its increasing desperation about South Australians' bad economic situation, and I think possibly a mini-budget looms. So what is a good future? What will be a good future for the South Australian economy? What's it look like? Well, there are two dominating trends for business in the advanced countries. Firstly, the importance of business startups and small business generally. And secondly, the importance of global supply chains. Economic success, future economic success for South Australia is much more dependent on stimulating the start of new businesses. We have to reinvent ourselves, you see. As the existing businesses, as the world has changed, circumstances have changed, and the existing businesses have fallen over, it's no good just... we have to reinvent ourselves. And it's no good just trying to protect failing businesses. This is a never-ending ordeal and will not work. The United States and OECD data show that only new firms are net job creators and existing businesses are net job destroyers. Why? Because they've reached the saturation level of their markets, and the only way to make more profits is to reduce their costs, particularly their labour costs. We have a good share of South Australia's startups. We could have a lot more, and we must stop risk-averse regulation of new things and become pioneering like we used to be in our successful 19th century start than we currently are. Why is small business and startups doing so well? Well, the internet, modern technology and knowledge, communication and linkage resources available through the internet has strongly raised the competitiveness of small businesses. Big businesses are outsourcing more and more of their non-core activities to small businesses because they can focus on the particular issues and have become significantly cheaper for large firms. For example, Uber links individual suppliers to individual demanders. In the US, you have this exactly the same model extended into home help, home visits, food, and so on. Large firms can now spread their supply chains globally. Look at the car industry. Design in Germany, manufacture in Thailand, marketing out of New York. what elements of Ford and Holden were are not going to be disbanded from Australia? Their design teams in Melbourne, Ford and Holden are not going to. They're going to keep their design teams here. They might as well sit here and communicate with the rest with the internet than go to Detroit. They wouldn't shift to Detroit anyway. And Adelaide has a comparative advantage because it is for attracting such teams, because it is a very nice place to live. So, winding up, what is our future if we get it right? It's a dynamic, evolving economy of specialised small businesses emerging from a very high rate of startups and of highly skilled units of Asian global businesses. High quality, innovative agriculture, manufacturing, design, R&D, the whole range of activities really in the economy. And I believe a standout centre for the creative arts industries, because that's something that we always tended to be good at: movies, TV programs, computer programming. Kent Town in Norwood is already abuzz with this sort of stuff. And so this, I think, is the future that we can look forward to. Thank you.
Some questions? Thank you very much, Dick, for that very insightful address. There are pluses and minuses, but I seem to see more minuses than pluses at the moment for us all. But members, Dick did condense that presentation to allow some questions, so which I now invite you to. John?
No, I think there's a balance of public sector and private sector employees, but the truth is that the scope for putting on more public sector employees has been reduced massively as a result of the economic fix that we're in. And the only way, in my opinion, of rejuvenating the economy is not to look to government to mop up people who are looking for work, but to rejuvenate the private sector. Without that, we're done for.
Steve?
Thanks very much. I guess my question relates to the fact that what we've talked about here really addresses the top end of the population, well-educated people, innovative, creative, etc. The problem we're facing is what happens to everyone else, and that's where all the concern is in the economy. People who perhaps have come through and are used to employment, in the same employer for a long time, doing relatively moderate value-add type roles. What for them?
Well, they get carried along by the much faster growth rate. How skilled do you have to be to work in a restaurant? See, there are lots of unskilled jobs that will be generated. I've made a study of two automotive companies, Red Arc and Australian Clutch Services, in recent times, and these are Adelaide companies, and they have significant unskilled people working in those companies, which have been phenomenally successful thanks to their innovative approach to what they do. So while it's true that the more skill that people have, the more likely they are to be employed in this new era, and we should encourage people to acquire as much skill as they can because they can make the most contribution. It is not true that going down this path means that the less skilled are not going to have a future. This is the only future for the skilled and the unskilled. I mean, it is impossible to suppose, unless we cut unskilled wages massively, that they can compete in car assembly with Thailand or China. It's impossible. So, you know, this is ridiculous. What they can do is that they can hang on to the productivity growth that comes from being innovative, highly skilled, highly capital intensive, and that there will be jobs that don't require so much skill that emerge as out of that mix.
One last question, I think, for time. George?
Thanks for that, Professor Blandy. You mentioned that we should look to 3 years of unregulated start-up businesses. What do you mean by unregulated?
Well, if we're going to have a big acceleration of startups, we have to reduce their costs in some way. A friend of mine says that we're not competing with Sydney, we're competing with Silicon Valley. And, you know, we must be 5 times less expensive than Silicon Valley if we're going to stop our youngsters heading for Silicon Valley. That is the truth of the matter. So we must get... part of the issue is certainly federal and not state, and that is the tax treatment of capital gains, particularly which people enter startups and they're paid in shares. And if the startup does brilliantly, the shares increase in value massively and they face incredible capital gains taxes as a result. We should stop that. I mean, Adelaide, South Australia, could try and make a deal with the government, the federal government, to say, why don't we try, run an experiment in these tax breaks, which would not cost the Australian government very much, but we can trial what this would all. Will it make a big difference in startups? See, so lots of changes in industrial relations laws, in ordinary regulations about what you can put in various suburbs and so on. We have got to try. We have got to become pioneering again, you see. Otherwise, South Australia is lost. We have got to try.
Thank you, Rotarians, and thank you very much, Dick, for that very, I suppose, insightful is not the right word, but there's encouragement there and hope. So on behalf of all our Rotarians and guests, would you please thank Dick in the usual way while I make this small presentation.